Alright, ladies and gentlemen, Baron here with another Ground Forces teaser. As of today, July 12th, Gaijin has released some more screenshots of the Ground Forces vehicles. And here we are looking at the T-34, and according to the Russian forums, this is the 1941 modification with the welded turret. And you can see right to the right side of that turret the applique armor that would be welded on to give it that nice sloped shape, which helps better deflect incoming shots. And then there's that classic T-34 sloped armor, which made it very notorious by us armchair generals and then the Germans who fought the damn things. Now, this tank has a 76.2 millimeter high velocity gun, and then it has that sloped armor, which really magnifies the armor of the tank. Another interesting thing about the T-34 was it had wider tracks, which allowed it, and pretty good suspension, which allowed it to do and perform better in mud and snow than a lot of its German counterparts like the Panzer III and Panzer IVs. Now, the T-34 is widely regarded as the best medium tank in World War II and one of the best tanks, and it had a lot of really innovative designs. Mainly the sloped armor, for one, was what most people regard it as. But hold on a second, look at this picture. Look at the level of detail. Look at the lamps, but then the two things that really caught my eye were the coaxial mounted machine gun right next to the turret, and then the hull mounted machine gun and the sloped armor. Look at the level of detail of those machine guns. I really hope that we are able to fire those machine guns. Now, yeah, back to this tank. Really is an all-around great tank. The only real downside is because of its sloped armor and the sloping of the turret, it limited the inner space of the tank. So instead of a turret which usually had a crew of 3 people, this one had a crew of 2, which meant the tank commander was doing a lot more work. So he was less effective in calling out targets and coordinating the tank and that. So a lot of Germans, the rate of fire of this tank was dropped, and I wonder if that's going to be represented within the game when compared with German tanks. It would kind of be historical way to balance the T-34 superiority over most Panzer III and Panzer IV tanks. So next we have the Panzerkampfwagen 3 Ausführung L. And yeah, I know the 3 and the L were not in German, but you know what? I did the best I could on the pronunciation. Now, the Ausf L, we'll call it, is a greater armored and greater armed variant of the Panzer III. It got more armor, and it, instead of the typical 3.7 centimeter gun that most Panzer IIIs had, this thing had a 5 centimeter gun. And that allowed it to penetrate a T-34's frontal armor within a distance of 500 meters. And within 500 meters against the T-34's frontal armor, that is not good territory, so it was still outclassed by the T-34. And when looking at it, you can see what looks to be a burning Russian T-34 in the background in that picture. And on to the next picture, just the level of detail. It looks like a fire, you know, like a fire extinguisher next to some extra tread wheels right there. Beautiful. And then you have the Tiger in the foreground firing at what looks like a T-34 in a village. This is just some intensely detailed tank action right now. It looks gorgeous, and yeah, it's pictures and you don't really know what you're doing until you get some gameplay, but it is looking great right now. So on to the Panzer VI, or the Tiger 1, which according to the forums is an Ausführung H1. Now, the Tiger, for those of you who do not know much about the Tiger, Um, One of the key distinctions of this tank, and which made it rightfully feared in Russians and Allied hands, was the 88 millimeter cannon. Now this, I believe, since it's the ALSF H1, I think it has the L56 88 millimeter cannon, and what that means is the cannon is 56 calibers long, and that is almost 5 meters or 16 feet. And the longer the barrel of the cannon, generally that equates to a higher projectile velocity of the ordnance coming out of it. So that, and greater projectile velocity means you can shoot further and more accurate at range. And the Tigers were basically like snipers with those 88 millimeter cannons. You could fire from extremely long distances, and the 88 millimeter, the German 88, had a very flat trajectory, so this thing was just immensely accurate and could fire crazy long distances. Now, just kind of another tip is that the Tiger II used an even longer 88 millimeter cannon, and that was over 6 meters or 20 feet long within that range. So the thing is beast. And here we have some of the pictures that came out a while back of the Tiger I that Gaijin released earlier. And just the level of detail on this iconic tank is impressive. And here we have the Tiger looking to cross that rickety old bridge. Probably not. He's probably lining up a Russian tank right now, sniper style. And then finally we have the Sherman M4A2. Now, the Sherman M4A2 was actually used, it was not used by the US Army. It was used by the US Marine Corps, and it was a Lend-Lease tank. And why was it a Lend-Lease tank? Or one of the characteristics that makes it a very good Lend-Lease tank was that it was diesel powered, as opposed to most M4 Shermans, which were gasoline or petrol powered. And the Russians used diesel engines and diesel fuel, so it made it good for the Russians in terms of fuel. However, the Russians did not like this tank when you could say, hey, I could be driving a T-34 as opposed to this. And one of the main reasons was they didn't like its high silhouette, and it was it had thin armor, and it was poorly angled when compared to some of, the T-34, which is a very, very dominant medium tank. Now, when you say, oh, well, look at that thing, it is pretty tall. And one of the tank tactics was to only expose your turret and kind of keep the rest of your hull below, terrain, so as to minimize your profile and allow you to hit your target with giving the least amount of surface area to see and fire back at. And the Sherman, the M4A2 Sherman, was 9 feet high, or 2.74 meters. Pretty tall. And its armor was only between 1 and 2 inches thick, although it was 3 inches on the very front of the turret. So, but the sloping and the thinness, relative thinness of that armor didn't, make it comparable to, T-34s. And what's interesting about this is it used 2 GM truck engines fueled by diesel. So, and that gave it a speed of 29 miles per hour, or a little over 46 kilometers per hour on roads. But yeah, the Russians did not prefer this tank compared to some of the other options it had. And something interesting I'm curious to see about is, people always say, or a lot of people say, that the Sherman and the T-34 were very good tanks in the war, but both of them were outclassed by, your Tigers and your Panthers of the German line. But what enabled the Allies, the Russians and the Americans, to overcome this, and the British, was that they could outproduce and have more tanks on the field, so they could suffer the losses. I wonder if that's going to be reflected in the gameplay. Let me know what you think. How will Gaijin kind of, because you're going to kind of need some sense of balance, and you don't have to mess with the tanks, you can mess with the numbers and the tiers and the costs of things. So I imagine that's how they're going to do it, because we, with War Thunder tanks, will get to enjoy near historical accuracy as opposed to the other option. Anyway, I'm Baron, thanks for watching, and you can check out my Ground Forces preview where I identified a lot of tanks, and then some of my naval unit previews as well, where I got into finding some pretty cool ships and discussing, you know, the various things that we get to wonder about, since there is no real news on ships right yet. But tanks are coming, and they said that we will get to experience the tanks within or before 2014, so one can hope. And then the Russian and the German trees will come out first, so keep that in mind. I'm Baron, thanks for watching.